Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today's May 6, 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Also, want to thank Kathy Siegel Garcia for introducing me to today's guest, Brent Fischer. Where are you calling in from, Brent?
San Fernando Valley, California.
How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing. Yeah, that's a question pondered by philosophers and marketing agencies since time immemorial, as Archie Bunker used to say, right?
Wait a
Uh,
minute. Brent, there's no difference. What's the difference between philosophers and marketing agents? Go ahead. That was fun. So, see,
yeah, I would say, I would say it means sustenance, in many forms. I mean, the five basic pleasures of life,
yeah,
right?
tell me.
There's eating, sleeping, going to the bathroom, physical intimacy, and, getting cleaned up, bathing or whatever.
Yeah.
What's the most important of those? Going to the bathroom. If you got to do that, you can't do anything else, right?
Yeah. There
So,
you go. I like that.
there are things like this, but then there's also, the deeper issues. Okay, once we get past all those basic issues, we need satisfaction of, curiosity.
Yeah.
Um, we need enlightenment and education. Definitely, we need to learn about how things work, and I think all these make up what humanity, or what's, let's say, civilization is supposed to be, as it may differ from other civilizations that have or may exist elsewhere in the universe.
Really beautiful, Brent. You covered the waterfront. You really getting into a lot of what we're going into. And the first thing is we're here to have fun. So I love that you had fun, but you got really deep there too. And they asked Gandhi, what do you think of 20th century civilization? He says, good idea. So you ended with civilization. That's beautiful. Brent, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, first I'd like to get it from multiple sources.
Yeah.
So I would suppose, because I have my phone in my hand for much of the day, that a lot of information will come to me through the phone first. However, anytime there's something on there, I feel like if it piques my interest, I feel like I need to go check it in multiple places and
Yeah.
see what everybody, find out if something is a hoax, find
Yeah.
out if, the news that's being reported is you know got some slant to it, an angle to it. So yeah, so I suppose the way that I do it on the phone is just by checking with multiple sources, for
That's
the
that's
things that interest me, that I want to learn more about.
yeah, that's comprehensive, really beautiful. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, for the stuff we were talking about before, enlightenment, satisfy curiosity,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Curiosity is a good thing. It will, it leads to discoveries and inventions, and all those great things that, in most ways make life easier, but also in some ways more complicated. But yeah, I can't think of anything else beyond that right
No,
now.
that's good. Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think even babies want to know more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why. I have a really early memory. They say that kids really can't remember that much from their early childhood, but I actually remember one day as a baby waking up in my crib and turning over and seeing that there was a teddy bear next to me. So I sat up and I started playing with it. And then I remember my mom coming into the room and saying, "Oh, you're up already." And I'm not sure that I even knew how to speak English at that point. I just kind of remember her saying something with that tone of voice that, that gave me that clue. And so, I was curious about stuff right from the beginning. And I think most babies are, that's why they get into mischief.
Wow, that's great, because about 10 questions down, that's the very question I was going to ask you. Can you conjure up your earliest memory? But since you answered it then, you got ESP, dude. This is fun. Since you asked us then, my follow-up, is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, I think it's essential, and I think that's why people who are losing their memory, feel like a part of them is going away, and the people that deal with elders who are losing memory see that their personality also kind of goes away with it. They lose a little bit of their personality. They become more instinctual,
Yeah,
and so no, I have always prided myself on having a great memory. However, I sense it being less
yeah,
now at midlife, and then I also sense sometimes there are things that you're trying to remember, and not necessarily on the tip of your tongue, but on the on the tip of your brain, right, the frontal
yeah,
lobe, trying to deal with these higher issues, and then sometimes it takes a second to deal with that. No, so I like having a good memory. Yeah, I would say the only thing wrong with a bad memory, or with a good memory, is that your mind will replay embarrassing moments in your life, right?
yeah.
But even that's it, hopefully to keep you from doing something embarrassing again, which in my case it works about 50% of the time.
Yeah, that's funny because I know my memory's been going, and I went to the doctor to have a test, and she says, "No, you're okay. If you look at your keys and you go, 'What are these for?' You're in trouble. If you lose your keys, that's normal." But as we
Right.
do age, yeah. But Brent, this is fun. You really get it. I appreciate it. Do thoughts create emotions?
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, unless you're trying to solve a math equation or something. But no, even getting the question right gives you a feeling, it gives you an emotional response, doesn't it? Or not being able to solve it also is another type of emotional response. So no, yeah, I'd say they're all connected
yeah. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
until I learn more about it.
Oh, nice. Yeah. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. But learn all about it is my mantra as well. I really like that. Can humans think without language?
Sure, I do that with music. Well,
Yeah.
I suppose that's a type of music. That's a type of language. Actually, I could
Yeah.
say it was my first language. I knew that before I knew English, because my father was also in the music industry. But yeah, I would say a lot of times that thinking takes place. Quick thinking takes place without language, especially if you're in a car and you see a big truck swerving into your lanes. You don't have time to put together a sentence. You just respond.
Yeah. No, I was riding my bike about 2 weeks ago, and I turned on this sidewalk, and there was a bar from a construction right at my head. And I went down, and I thought, after I missed it, I went, how did you do that? I didn't have any conscious awareness that I
Right.
was dead in my head. I
Yeah.
mean, it was like, what? I was like, thank you. How'd that happen? So Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
That's a very interesting question because there are two things that I want to bring up. One is about vocabulary, and then the other is about communicating with people that are speaking English as a second language when you're traveling.
Yeah.
or trying to communicate in another language. I mean, so, but when it has to do with vocabulary, I feel like, and this could be a complaint that people have had for decades. But if I read a book that was written in the 18 or 1900s, I may come across a whole set of terminology that that I need to look up and make myself aware. And I think having a large vocabulary, of course, helps you express yourself better. It I actually often liken what my father started and what I do musically with dealing with a musical vocabulary that is sort of it's drawing from so many different sources that it is expanded over, let's say, people who just deal with one genre. I mean, imagine, you're reading one of these books from the 19th or the 20th century by a really gifted author, and he or she draws you into the story, and every once in a while you have to look up a word and find out what it means, but then you get this really subtle shade of meaning from the collection, the all-encompassing thought process that's going on in this paragraph, that gives you these subtle details that otherwise I think in a situation, for example, when you're trying to explain something to somebody where you don't share a real common language, or even somebody who speaks English as their first language but doesn't have a big enough vocabulary. And so you really have to, in either case, you have to get used to making succinct points, because I mean, if you keep your sentences short and you use smaller words, you're going to get understood better by anybody who has a vocabulary problem. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And I constantly see people overseas, and not just English speakers. I mean, I've seen Americans, Brits, New Zealanders, Australians, Canadians in foreign countries, and they think if they speak louder, that person will understand them. Do you understand me? Just by and the gestures, the hand gestures, right? It makes no difference at all. But I've also seen that in countries where somebody is trying to get by speaking Spanish to the staff, because maybe there are quite a few people that speak Spanish in that country, or French, or German, or any one of those. They will do that. So yeah, it's all
That
the
was really good,
fascinating thing about
Brett. In 40 years,
traveling around the world.
yeah, in 40 years of asking that question, no one's ever used the word vocabulary, and that is deep, because I study etymology, where a word comes from.
Yeah,
And that
right.
doesn't mean because it comes from cool, comes from temperature, it doesn't mean if I go, that music was cool, it didn't make me cold, it was warm, and it means the opposite. So vocabulary was a key word. And you also evoked the great McLuhan line. He goes, "Shut up," he said. People think if I speak louder, I mean, everything you said is what I always talk too much, and I start these questions with too much information. So you're like teaching me, like, cool out, dude. You can be simpler and get across. So here's a basic one. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
That depends on your education level,
Hmm.
right? Because if you're dealing with someone, regardless of their age, who is not that well educated, I think that would be a person, like we were talking about a couple minutes ago, who would think many times a day without actually using language. They'll act on instinct and on emotion and on cues that are coming from their experience in the world around them. Other people who are, who gain a big education. I'm not talking about a PhD or anything like that. I just have a bachelor's degree. I never pursued anything beyond that. I love the line from the movie Good Will Hunting where the main character says, "Why spend $200,000 for a university education that you can get the same education for $4 in late fees from the library?"
Yeah.
But you need to research, right? You need to know how to research, and that's part of what my college education did for me. Is it taught
Yeah.
me how to learn, right? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
in that way, then that's when you're dealing with people like that. It's again, you can use a larger vocabulary. You can get into more nuances, and if you don't, then again, you have to have a way to communicate using small words and short sentences so that you can still
Yeah.
get your point across regardless. Sometimes it's just hand gestures in a different country. There could be hand.
Beautiful.
I mean, what is it? I've ordered a. I did learn how to when I was traveling a lot in Europe, touring a lot. I did learn how to order a hamburger exactly the way I like it in 6 different languages. However, when with 6 different European languages. However, when I got to places, Asian countries, it was just too complicated. So I remember, like the guy in the restaurant showing me a picture of a hamburger, and I would, point to this, and then I'd point to that part and go like that, and we got our point across, and my order was correct,
Right.
and we didn't say a word to each other.
Amazing. You evoked one of the biggest enlightenments in McLuhan's research. Your learning was Alfred Whitehead saying that discovery of discovery was immense. That
Right.
learning, and so Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? When people meditate, they go, okay, now think about not thinking. And there's a
Right.
bumper sticker. There's a bumper sticker on a car in my street, and it says, don't believe everything you think. And I say, well, you could
Right.
say, don't believe everything you feel. So these are 2 questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
Now we need to specify in case somebody is watching this in 40 years. This is a question from the 1950s, right?
Yes. Very
The
good.
19 Okay, right. So
Put it into context. That's the most important thing.
yeah, I'm sorry. Now I stopped at
Oh, yeah.
50s and I forgot the
Is
question.
is thinking a function of the soul?
I I'm not sure. We talk about our basic functions, and then we talk about the areas of the brain, I guess, that are responsible for civilization, mostly the frontal lobe. And I just don't know. I'm not. It's an interesting question. I'm not well enough researched to be able to answer that.
No,
You
totally
know.
fine, because I want people to feel comfortable. Saying I don't know or I can't answer, that's perfectly legit. It's not, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Rebecca Solnit says, great, just because you ask a question doesn't mean I have to answer it. These are just prompts. So, anyways, the second Turing question is, can machines think?
Well, so far, if you're looking at things like AI, it appears that they can mimic, and then they can
Yeah,
put together why they need to mimic something. But
yeah,
yeah, I saw somebody writing something the other day about how they put everything that they want to post on social media through AI first and have it sort of, make sure the grammar and the spelling are all correct. Having help with spelling is
yeah.
a good thing, but no, I don't think that they have the capability. I mean, you can tell I watch a lot of films. The whole idea of Terminator, the Terminator series is you know the machines become self-aware and
Yeah.
interested in self-preservation and continuation and propagation. But yeah, I'm just not so sure about that because if like I said, the way AI is today, it's looking at what most people write on the internet, which is mediocre at best. There are some
Yeah.
great gifted writers. There are some very eloquent people out there. Um, but most of what's out there is sort of mediocre, and I'm not meaning that as an insult. It's just
Yeah.
because maybe somebody is not thinking too much about what they're saying. They're just sort of writing it very quickly and putting it out there. But then, so this is what AI is learning from,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
I don't think if you read the great philosophers to a machine that it is going to come up with more philosophies, based
Yeah.
on the previous works, right?
Well, that's someone said AI is in its infant stage and it's our job to raise it well. So it's still, we hope it's a tool that will have services. So do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Um, Both. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah,
I
because
would say both.
I got it from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning tends to last.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and when you're saying that, you just reminded me of something else that had to do with AI. There was one of the albums that I released probably about 4 years ago. I released a completely new arrangement of the classical piece "Pictures at an Exhibition," which was written in 1875, I think, or something like that. I did a completely different 21st century version of it. And in the album, I was also talking about one of my interests, which is becoming a multiplanetary species. And in order
Yeah.
to do that, of course, you need to go into space. And so space travel and exploring other worlds has always been interesting to me. And because I was talking about that at the end of this, very, very long album liner notes, I wrote at the end, if you have read all the way to this point, I want to thank you very much. It means worlds to me. Now,
That's good.
so I put that in there, and the typesetter, the guy who actually put it onto the CD, I guess he must have passed it through some sort of AI thing, and it came out as "It means the world to me," and we had to print it again because that's not what
Wow.
I meant to say. It corrected, so-called correction, made it actually more mediocre because it was less individualistic. It was less unique.
Amazing. It corrected it wrong. It corrected it wrongly.
Yeah, yeah,
Amazing. Well, thank God you caught it, because a lot of times, you give it to the proofreader and then you trust it. So good going there. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
well, I think both at the same time,
Yeah.
because there are many times when you're not thinking about, if you're really busy doing something, you're not thinking about the nature of existence or pondering these great questions. You're just trying to get something done. So
Yeah.
I think these can both be happening at the same time. And then it's this you become actually self-aware. You become aware of these things going on when you get to that spot where it's like, what's that word again? Can't remember that word. That's when you really think about that.
That's when you have a breakthrough. So, or an epiphany. So, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Also, a very excellent question. Well, if you're, uh, can you? can you think it without communicating it? Because if you're going to communicate over any distance, you're going to need it's going to need to travel somewhere, and this is what makes it hard for people to have a jam session online, where you got like one guy behind the drum set, the other guy's playing
Right.
guitar, and you see all, like 4 or 6 of them on
Yeah.
the screen, and they're all jamming together. That doesn't happen because of something called latency. The signal only goes so fast, and it is much slower than the speed of light. It's faster than the
Yeah.
speed of sound, but it's about the best that technology can provide today. And so anytime you see those people jamming, they had to kind of pre-record that stuff, even if people are telling you, oh no, there's this new service out there, it's
Yeah.
instantaneous. There's always going to be 10 milliseconds or something like this. So
Yeah.
communicating thoughts definitely is going to be at less than the speed of light if there's any
Yeah.
distance involved. But having the thought in your head, I think that's instantaneous.
Beautiful. You're really a comprehensivist. Pascal, the musician, mathematician philosopher, says in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that, and everything in between. And that's what
Yeah.
I see. You're sort of like, let's entertain all. Okay, this is the poet Audre Lorde. You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Her colleague Yvonne Rainer said, oh, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
I wouldn't even know where to begin with that, except for probably, the one of the points that I always try to make, and maybe some people have heard me make this before, but hearing is the least developed of our senses, right? And the
Wow.
analogy that I often use is you go into a restaurant, you can smell the food, you have terminology to describe what you smell. I smell chicken, I smell barbecue sauce, whatever you're smelling. Um, when the food arrives, you can touch it with your fingers, like if you're grabbing a French fry and it feels crispy, feels crunchy, or no, this one's soft. Whatever. We have terminology to describe the colors of the foods, everything, the smells, the tastes. But what about the music that you're listening to in the restaurant?
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you listen to it and instantly know that, for example, the song is in 4/4, the key is B flat major. I hear the singer currently singing a D. He was just at an F before that. The chord right now is, F major 7, going after that to an E flat minor chord. It's one of those quirky, unformulaic tunes. Um, and can you do this? And the answer, unfortunately, for people is no.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, a very sad thing about civilization is there are so few people who can understand what they hear. That's not to say that your enjoyment of music would be any less. Okay, I don't know
Yeah.
that much about cinematography. I don't know that much about a lot of different things having to do with the arts, but
Yeah.
um, that doesn't diminish my enjoyment of it. It's another analogy I use is listening to music without a musical education, without terminology to be able to understand and describe what you're hearing and to perceive it on a
Yeah.
detailed level. It's like walking down the street and you see some beautiful building and you're just, amazed by the architecture, and it's just so wonderful. But an engineer or an architect can go into that building and, knock on the walls and say, oh yeah, I hear there's some kind of sheathing in there that's insulatory, and so this building probably keeps warm in the winter and cold in the summer, and things like that. You can have a more detailed understanding when you hear music. And I would probably argue that my enjoyment of good music, music that I really like, music that stimulates me, is probably even greater than somebody who is enjoying it on an intuitive level.
Yeah.
However, I'm not one of those people that will, writhe uncontrollably if something is really moving me. It's more of a cerebral experience to me. But it's still, I think the joy is actually it goes deeper. On the other hand, um, you know, the great thing about having lived a while now is every once in a while I will get a message from somebody saying, your music got me through a really tough time in my life, or it gave me the will to battle and win against the cancer that I was dealing with, or something like that, and which directly contradicts. Um, After I had finished the first album that I ever made in my life, the first time I had a professional, I had joined the Musicians Union. I made an album, it was released. It actually won a Grammy. I was 16 years old. Uh, after we were done with the album, I went up to the drummer and I was talking with him, and I was very, I was being kind of very, well, I was still a student, so I was being kind of like a student, analyzing my work at like, oh, I hope I'm going to get an A or a B, that type of thing. I said, yeah, I think I did. I think I did a really good job on this album, but there are definitely some parts of it that I could have done better, had we had
Yeah.
more time. And the drummer said to me, this stuff ain't going to cure cancer. And actually, stuff wasn't the word that he actually used, but we'll keep this G rated. So, I thought about that, and that kind of stuck with me. And it's like, oh, that kind of like put everything in perspective. In other words, don't worry. He was trying to tell me, don't worry about it so much. It's okay. It's all right to have, a few mistakes here and there. That's part of the
Yeah.
art. That's what makes it human. So I got that part of it. But it also stayed with me for all those years. And when people started telling me that they found the will to live another day to battle cancer because of some music that I had done, well, that kind of contradicts what I was told when I was 16 years old, so in a good way, right?
It is a great story, Brent.
Yeah.
And you evoked two great ones. Is I was fortunate enough to work with Frank Zappa for 10 years, and we were eating food in a restaurant, in an Indian restaurant, probably blocks from where you are in the valley. And in the middle of the dinner, he goes, "Hey, it's the Indian classical music." And Frank goes, "They just changed keys." He was listening because he knew this is like wallpaper. They're just trying to make an atmosphere. And I mean, we know now restaurants play music way too loud. But the other one you really evoked is when John Zorn made a big deal about Carl Stalling, the great American composer whose music was featured in all the Bugs Bunny cartoons. And when I started become aware of his composing, he was one of the great scavenger composers like Charles Ives, Frank Zappa, and Carl Stalling. They took from everywhere. I said to my friend, did you ever watch a Bugs Bunny cartoon with your eyes shut? Because we don't hear the Carl Stalling music. We hear Bugs Bunny in animation, and we're kind of not aware that this music is going on. And it's
Yes.
sort of like secondary. So your comment, what tool do you suggest? Hearing is the least developed of our senses, increasing our awareness of hearing as an important sense. That's beautiful. The follow-up, Brent, is what toy do you suggest? What toy do you gravitate towards?
Toy. Oh gosh. Well, again, I know I can put this in whatever context I choose, but I would say the other thing the toys that I have are physical media. Okay,
Yeah.
I still have DVD players. In fact, I bought a bunch of them and CD players when they were still in the stores, because I want to be able to listen to CDs and watch DVDs
Yeah.
for a long time. And so I would say those are some of my toys.
Yeah.
And that's also another point that I make when I am, let's say, doing music industry panels, like at a music convention or something like that, is trying to uh, get these people who have accepted the status quo to come back to the idea that physical merchandise really is the way to save certain arts.
Yeah.
And I refer actually very, very unapologetically to all sorts of streaming activity collectively as
Yeah.
Stopify,
Yeah.
because they
Stop.
stop
Yeah.
they stop money,
Yeah.
from going to artists.
Yeah.
And so, I saw a big post talking about how great it was that all these streaming numbers went up. It was the CEO of a major streaming company talking about how great the streaming numbers were after the Olympics in France, and all the groups that were featured there, their streaming numbers just went through the roof. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I guess that was probably good for another $47 or something like that. All those hundreds of thousands or millions of
Yeah.
streams. And so I answered the post, and I said, these words have been brought to you by Big Brother. If this
Yeah.
isn't Orwellian newspeak, I don't know what
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. There's another question I want to insert really quick, because we will get into music eventually, is your knowledge, because you're so well versed in music, but in also capturing music. I mean, your first LP won a Grammy when you're age 16. That was on vinyl. The cliche or the archetype is analog has more warmth than digital. Has digital, in your opinion, gotten the warmth of analog yet, or will it ever?
No, but but I like both.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think about two things. Yes, the warmth is definitely greater. I still have an LP turntable, and I have a great record collection. I don't listen to them as much as I listen to the CDs, just because of the fact that LPs won't last as long. So I want to
Yeah.
really save those for a time
Yeah.
when I'm going to sit down and do nothing but just sit there and listen.
Yeah.
And whereas a CD, I've got a CD player in my car, so I listen to music while I'm driving. The
Yeah.
music that I choose that does not get taken away by a streaming service and put onto the premium level because
Yeah.
they saw that I was streaming it too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there for me forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's that warmth, but there's an incredible amount of detail that can go into, and this definitely wasn't something I was thinking about when I was 16 years old. It's only since I've been producing more in later years that I'm
Yeah.
really thinking about and I'm not a music engineer. I use great music engineers to help me in my work, and I am the guy who is kind of unencumbered by what the technology can do, and I just simply tell them, I'd like this to be like this. Can you make that happen? And then they
Yeah.
figure out a way to do it in most cases. So there's that detail, right? But I also noticed something that I have a newer TV and I have an older TV. When I watch older movies, and at this point, it's really strange to think that 1990s is considered older. But when I'm watching older movies, 50s through the 90s, whatever, it's even if they're in color and everything is beautiful and stuff like that, I almost prefer to watch those on the older TV, because when I watch it on the newer TV, it
Yeah.
looks fuzzy. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
and then conversely, when I'm watching something that was just shot on super high def
Yeah.
video, and I'm looking at, actors having a conversation, and I'm more thinking about how many, like the peach fuzz that I'll see on somebody's face, or the pores, or little tiny details like that. That I would maybe there's a piece of lint on somebody's shirt that I wouldn't have noticed had it been shot in a little bit lower definition. And so, but that may just be me needing to get used to that level of detail.
Well,
Again,
Brent, it's both, because you said the word both, and that's what really impresses me, that you know analog and digital are both, but you are nostalgic and know that these older mediums have some things that the newer mediums don't have. And I'll give you an example of what you just said that happened to me. I went to a play at the Company of Angels, theater in LA, that started in 59, and it was a wonderful play.
wow.
And I walk in and they go, if you want the program, hit this button with your cell phone. Well, I don't have a cell phone, and I wanted to look at the program like I have going to
Oh,
theater my whole life. And I
yeah,
think they should have said the option, hit this button if you want the program on your cell phone, or we'll hand you a cheesy Xerox of the program because we don't have a budget to print it out. But I didn't like that there was just one way, that you could
yeah,
only have. That's a tradition of going into a theater and reading the program. So
yeah.
very good, Brett. I appreciate your concise and articulate. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
My aim when I'm going to bed is to try and forget anything
Yeah,
that could be worrying to me. No, I will do that if I haven't gotten enough sleep and I need to try and wake myself up in the morning. But
yeah,
having spent decades um, um changing time zones, and sometimes drastic time zone changes, 9, 12 hour, 15-hour time zone differences, uh, I have lost the ability to sleep usually for more than about 3 hours at a time. However, I will, wake up in the middle of the night, grab some water, whatever, maybe read for 15 minutes or something, read a book for 15 minutes. And then I'll go back to sleep, and I'll get another, 2 or 3 hours in, and that's fine. So,
yeah,
I've sort of gotten used to that. But the one thing that I always remember when I'm trying to go to sleep is, or trying to get back to sleep, is that whatever is worrying me right then, I can't do anything about it now.
yeah,
That's my mantra. Like, whatever is on my mind, I can't do anything about it now in bed.
yeah,
Uh, However, I can write music while I'm laying in bed, and I use that kind of as a meditation. I will
yeah.
play the music back in my head. I'm imagining my fingers on the keyboard, or thinking the notes. However, I would have to do it, and then write music. And there are actually some times when I'll do it in the morning. Again, maybe I am too tired to just get out of bed quite yet, but I'm awake, and the mind is willing, but the body is not quite there yet. And so I will write a little bit of music. There are some times when I have woken up and been writing music in my dream, and then I will go downstairs and write out what I just dreamt. And
Beautiful.
I've never actually made a song out of any of those ideas, but I have incorporated those ideas into an arrangement that I'm making or something. In other words, I've never had like a complete,
Yeah.
work come to me in my sleep, but little ideas,
It's
little
it's
ideas.
bub it's bubbling in the background, definitely. Well, it
Yeah.
sort of goes along with this. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists, musicians, are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I ask you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, I don't know that people are necessarily ignoring them. I think, some people do. Again, people that are looking at art as kind of a diversion,
Yeah,
then yeah, that could be. But I think, yeah, there are people that have told me that they put on my music, and obviously these are not musicians. These are people that I was just alluding to earlier that haven't developed their sense of hearing, but they want to have music in the background, and they say they will put on this or that album of mine, or album that I've worked on for somebody else, when they want to, and then they name an activity of some kind. They'll have that going on in the background. So, yeah, I don't know. A little bit fuzzy on that one. Sorry.
No, don't worry at all. Do artists have moral obligation?
Do artists have a moral obligation? Well, that assumes that artists are trying to have an influence on culture. And there are some times when I think that art should be just appreciated for what it is itself. Okay, any of these beautiful paintings behind me, if you want to get a moral lesson from them, I think you can, but I think you also just can enjoy the colors, being part of the ambience of the environment, and the same. There are many songs that I've composed in my life that have no message, especially if there are songs without lyrics. You can make of it what you will, right? And but there was one time, and yeah. So if you want to talk about moral obligation, I mean, I would say one of the most overused statements that people make in the music industry, I hope this doesn't get me in trouble, is change the world.
Yeah.
And, okay, yes, people are doing things that change the world, but I'm not necessarily sure that everything needs to be with that thought in mind, because in what direction do we want to change it? And nobody can agree on that. So, when it comes to, like, do we have a moral obligation? Well, I have felt every once in a while a moral obligation to do something, and the best example I can think of is about 12 years ago. I was working on an album with somebody where they were taking instrumental music of my father and adding lyrics to it. My father was Fischer, also a Grammy-winning producer, composer, arranger, like myself. That's where I got into the music industry because I didn't realize there was something else to do. I just, by the time I realized there were other careers, it was too late. I was already working as a professional musician. So there you have it. But I was working on an album where somebody was taking instrumental compositions of my father and adding lyrics to the melodies. And so we went through, and I approved each lyric, but there were some times where I needed to write some things and explain situations, the way my father's thought processes worked and stuff like that, and then they would adjust the lyrics and it would work out fine. But this one spot that we couldn't really agree on, we end up compromising, was that this one song that my father had written was a happy song. But it was, but it was the lyrics were kind of like about angst and unfulfilled longing and things like that. And I said, look, this is this is a happy song. And the comment that came back was, it's a blues, for goodness sake. Blues are, about angst and unfulfilled longing and things like that. So we've got to, do that. And I countered back, look, my father derived great joy from playing the blues in his lifetime. If he was sad, or if he had the blues, he would play a ballad. And so he never got anything but joy. This is a joyful song. Wow. And we need to change the lyrics. So the lyrics ended up being, for the most part, upbeat.
Yeah.
but it was also, keep searching and you'll find it, right there. That type of thing. Like, you haven't found it yet. So I feel it was a good compromise. Um,
Beautiful.
and I often say, like, when it comes to like, I don't get into politics, but I often say, in this age of, where each side there's a lot of enmity and mistrust. There's one thing that people have to learn is that vegetarians and meat eaters need to learn how to compromise and coexist, right?
Yeah.
So everybody has to have that ability to compromise, and we did this in this case. But
Yeah.
it got me thinking, why do the blues have to
Yeah.
evoke sadness? And
Yeah.
so I decided to get together with a lyricist friend of mine, Darlene Koldenhoven, brilliant lyricist, and I said, I want to write a song that is happy and upbeat, but it's a blues, and it's basically the lyrics will be about enjoying the blues even though you don't have them. And so
Yeah.
she came up with the title "Sad About Nothing Blues."
Yeah.
And that became, a song that we put on an album in 2014, and it got very good response. It didn't change the world.
Right.
It didn't solve the problems of the two camps that think, one that thinks, okay, blues have to be happy, and the other thing is
Yeah.
blues are all about sadness. But I think my contribution. So there was a little bit of moral obligation in there. So yeah, I don't think it's a necessity
Yeah.
for art to give someone a moral direction or a moral instruction or something like that. However, I don't deny anybody who feels that way their process. And as a matter of fact, I've worked on many songs where there was a message of some kind that that the singer felt very strongly about, and I did my best to make sure that the music was supported in my arrangement, that the concept of the music was supported in how I treated it.
Great story, Brent. That was sharp. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Afraid? I usually don't live my life with much fear. I'm realistic and pragmatic, but
Yeah.
but no, I don't think that well, let's put it this way. I don't think that a good idea is temporarily fixed, right? A good idea should work
Yeah.
across all time periods. Okay, something may become outdated, uh, but that doesn't still mean that it's not a good idea because it was outdated. It's a good idea for its time, but then no, I don't mind new ideas. However, new ideas that people come up with that are based on where the new idea actually shows that they are exhibiting a lack of deep understanding about something by coming up with this new idea. Those do bother me. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, but I think the same can be said. There are old ideas that maybe aren't outdated, but they don't really have a useful purpose, the way civilization has changed in
Yeah.
in recent times. So on the other hand, no, I'm again eternally optimistic about the the course of civilization, because I think there's always going to be a balance of you know ideas that help humanity and help people, and ideas that hurt it.
Yeah. Now, Brent, this next question is two-part, and I just want to uh, say it. It's tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact? Now, I know you've probably gone into your dad's influence in many times in the past, but you can answer it at your dad or whoever, but we don't want it to go too long. I mean, what did you mainly get from your dad? The biggest impact that you got from your dad? What was, as a role model, how would you summarize that?
I would say, well, yeah, and if you're talking about somebody else from outside the family, there were actually two people, and they were good friends, and they worked together for most of their life. And that was my dad and his friend, who ended up being kind of a mentor to me for many years, Gary Foster. And
Yeah,
so they both kind of showed me different sides of the music industry, and how it relates to life in general, and the whole concept of professionalism, because
yeah,
professionalism is something that seems to have been lost a little bit in this idea that there's this concept that, well, I don't know art, but I know what I like, which
yeah,
is, to me, okay, I can abide by that concept part way, but imagine saying, somebody saying, um, well, yeah, I have a plumbing company, but I don't know anything about plumbing really, but I know that the water's not supposed to leak from places, and but I leave it to the other guys to try and figure out.
right.
I get my workers to take care of that for me. So you know so I think there's that idea, and then just this whole idea of being conducting yourself in a professional manner when you're when
Yeah,
you're getting a job done, and thinking, that's where I think not getting too emotional about
yeah,
art can come in handy. You need to look at things from a distance, and that can
yeah,
sometimes be very hard when you're dealing with the same song, day in and day out. I do music consulting on the side, and one of the things that I help people with is, they have been recording and then mixing and just tweaking this song endlessly for months at a time, and they just don't know if they have it yet. And so I'm a
yeah,
third set, an unbiased, kind of detached set of
yeah,
ears, who can be, because of my the extreme detail in which I can perceive what I hear, I can give them a very detailed analysis with suggestions for how they can
yeah,
clean up all these nuances, which add polish to stuff. So there's that idea, and then my dad had a little bit of a military training. He was drafted during the Korean War,
yeah,
and so he conducted recording sessions and rehearsals and concerts with this, not like overly military, but he did things on time, and he made sure that stuff worked a certain way and that everybody was pulling their weight. And I think that's something that I have done in a second generation way to still, keep everything kind of running smoothly. I think the whole idea is to keep things running smoothly. And so I learned that from him, and from his friend, I learned about, sort of entrepreneurial ideas as they relate to the music industry, but which can be, translated over into other fields. And the whole idea that two people who had very differing views on life and the way that they lived their life, and the things that were important to them, um, were still able to make great music together, and have this long lasting friendship, like 5 or 6 decades, regardless of all these other things that made them such different people. So I think that's
yeah,
amazing. I've been able to make music with people who I don't have any common language
yeah,
with. I've played a lot of um, with a lot of international groups over the decades, and to be able to go on stage and learn somebody's music and play it with them, with again the all nonverbal cues, and then derive great joy from that. Also from the idea that I can understand or try and understand the way they hear their music through their ears instead of what I know from my upbringing, and see if I can wrap my head around how they are perceiving music and dealing with it. So these all, these all had, a great effect on me.
Yeah, back to hearing, is underrated. And most people don't realize one of the most important ingredients in music is listening. And I think that's what both Claire and Gary helped, wean you into understanding the importance of listening in music, and,
Yeah.
bring it back grounded. Claire was raised 20 minutes from where I was raised. I was raised in Flint, Michigan. He was raised in Durand, Michigan. I
I
was like,
know
dude,
you're a Flint man.
I am so honored and privileged to spend this time with you. I really appreciate it, Brent. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No,
Do you pray?
I make it a policy that I don't discuss religion or politics, and I hope that's okay with you. But I leave those issues to other people. I just
No,
completely stay out of discussions having to do with any of that stuff.
no worries at all. And I'm curious. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're writing, I'm glad you're laughing. When you're writing a Brent composition, it's not a commission. It's just your song for you to write. What role does intention play in your creative process?
I think, intention can sometimes be a big part of it because I have something that I want to do. I have a framework in mind for the sonic architecture. In other words, I know what I
Yeah.
want to build. Now I just have to go and build it. But there are other times when it can be a little more free form and very, just amorphous. And I
Yeah.
will let ideas flow where they may. And so, I guess that would have to do also with the different impressions that people have of me depending on what they know about my career. In other words, I think people who know of me from having done arrangements for a lot of R&B artists, or worked behind the scenes with a lot of major R&B artists, Prince, Michael Jackson, D'Angelo, Usher, all those guys. They have, I think they have this idea that R&B is my main genre, and then there are other
Yeah.
people that know me strictly as a jazz guy.
Yeah.
And there are some people who within the jazz realm know me just as a big band guy, and then there's a whole other group of people that know me as the Latin jazz guy, because that was
Yeah.
a big part of my history for many years and still is.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's the tricky
Well,
thing when you're writing. It's like who are you writing towards? Who are you writing for? One thing that I think I haven't gotten into enough, simply because I've been pigeonholed in certain areas by people who would be tending to call me to work with them, is I haven't done enough in the rock field. And
yeah.
I have worked with different rock artists,
Yeah.
but I would like to do more in progressive rock, heavy metal, all the different types of rock music that I think is stuff that some of the older stuff is what I grew up with at the
Yeah.
same time. But that was I was growing up with rock music at the same time I was playing jazz music and learning about that, and then doing classical music in high school and at the university. And so all these things kind of have informed my decision-making processes, but the intent can sometimes be laser focused, or it can be just very, let me see what happens.
Good, Brent. This is follow up. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your listener when you're composing your music?
Actually, what I'm thinking of, and I don't know if this is going to sound, uh, I don't know if it's going to sound strange or egotistical or whatever, but I think back to Bach, J.S. Bach. So
Yeah,
he wrote all this great music in the late 17th, early 18th century, and it was lost for a long time. He was not well received during his lifetime. And then Mendelssohn in the 19th century, like probably 100 years or so after Bach's death, discovered his music and popularized it. And that's a big running dispute I have with many people who perform the music of Bach, because they tend to romanticize it because it became popular during the Romantic era of music by people like Mendelssohn, and became an influence on people like Brahms and all these other great Romantic composers. But then Baroque music was a different style. It was a different mentality. But I think back to that music was discovered and it persists, and people are enjoying it today. And Bach had no idea
yeah,
that would happen when he was writing the music. Now, speaking of actually religion, his primary focus, I heard a quote, obviously translated from German to English, that for him, writing music is none other than for the glorification of God. That was
yeah,
his sole purpose in life.
yeah.
So these are all these different viewpoints that inform your intention. But when I'm writing something, if I'm writing an arrangement for somebody else, yes, we're probably going for a certain market or a certain, something that they're trying to do, and it's my job to help them fulfill that. But when I'm writing something specifically just for myself, and I'm really not thinking about whether people will gravitate to it or not, because I know that what I'm doing has merit just by
Yeah.
itself, because I'm a careful craftsman. And again, when I build sonic architecture, there's a great deal of thought and emotion that goes into it. So I stand by the work, whether it becomes popular or not. And so really who I'm writing for are the listeners of the 23rd and 24th century, because it may
Beautiful.
not happen in my lifetime that a
Yeah.
lot of people will get blown away by this and get interested in something. But I'm hoping that it's of enough interest to scholars that at some point they will research it, learn
Yeah.
something from it, and then apply that to music that they are doing in that time period.
That
And
that's so beautiful, because McLuhan's favorite line was, "The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can." And so that's like, a beautiful thought. He also said everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. And maybe even non tangible, say religion or philosophy, extends consciousness.
right.
I know you play bass, drums, and vibes, but let's just go with keyboard. What humanness does the piano extend for you?
Yeah, because that's how I write. Right.
Yeah,
I don't write music I have written at the vibraphone. I have written a little bit at the
yeah,
bass. But mostly when I'm writing, especially if I'm arranging for somebody, I come up with those ideas at the keyboard. And so yeah, that's absolutely something that I use only as a tool, so that I can get a sort of a running start to putting the ideas together. But actually that is again, it's just to get me started. Most of the compositional or the arrangemental process goes on in my head, because actually I'm not a good enough keyboardist to be able to play something the way the way I would like, or in some cases I don't have enough fingers. But so most of the time I want to be able to think about it in my head. I want to also think of it in terms of how Beethoven was able to write music even though he was deaf. He couldn't hear a note, he couldn't hear a sound, but he came up with all these great orchestral ideas. Now he had a lot of training, and he was able to sort of get ready while he was going deaf. But so I think about it in terms like that, because I know there are a lot of composers who will just simply put things together electronically. They'll play an idea and then they will manipulate it using some sort of software, and add a beat to it and add this and add that to it, and play it back. There are even guys who are writing for orchestras who are writing with virtual orchestra first at their home computer setup. They're like digital workstation, where they're listening to a playback. They come up with the ideas and they listen to a playback using a virtual French horn and strings and trumpets, flutes, whatever. I don't want to do that, because the virtual instruments always sound a little bit different from the real. And even though people keep on saying, oh, it's getting closer, they're getting closer. Yeah, well, then how come, this ultimate set of sounds that we had in 2018 is no longer good enough? Now we need the new virtual instrument sounds from 2025, because those are outdated sounding. But a live instrument like an alto clarinet is going to sound just as beautiful in the hands of a gifted musician in 2165 as it did in 1952. And as a matter of fact, actually going back to Carl Stalling, I was lucky enough that in my lifetime, I got to work with some of those guys, a few of those musicians who had a lot of longevity and career longevity, that did all those recordings way back in the early to mid 20th century, and then they're still around in the 80s and 90s and 2000s for me to be able to work with them. And I'll also get some stories about making the music and all that stuff. But I got off on a tangent now. Where were we going?
Well, that was a good tangent, because what I would assume you're saying is, what does the keyboard extend for you is thinking. But I'm curious, if you had to summarize it in a word or two, what humanness does the keyboard extend? That was all good. That's what I'm after, Brent, is to get deeper in tangents. Totally welcome for that.
I mean, the humanness that the keyboard extends is it becomes the way that you can express the emotions that are part of, I like to say that I exist at the intersection of art, science, and math, because I use a lot of science and I use a lot of math when I'm putting together music. Okay, you have to be aware of the capabilities of the instruments, the ranges of the instruments, which are the low instruments, which are the high instruments, all those things. So there's definitely art involved in it, but there's also a lot of science and math, and that especially goes beyond my capabilities when you get into the engineering part, where these are the guys that are really, understanding a microphone angle, how we should, ideally position a microphone, and things like that, and room acoustics and stuff. I did a physics of acoustics course in college, and I don't remember a thing about it. I got the calculations right for the tests,
but again, Brent, you've learned how to develop an aesthetic by listening, because that hearing, you stress hearing and listening early on, and it's amazing, because I really want to get a lot deeper into music now. I only have about 20 more minutes, so I hope we can plan a part 2 so we can really get into music. But the thing is, I have to tell you, I have this whole thing where we go into science and art and what's the difference. But the key word you said is math. That's Thelonious Monk said music is math. And it's like, you know, that's the last thing you really think that Monk is doing is mathematics. But in a way, me and you can understand that because you break it down. But it seems as though it's just, you know, taking Fats Waller and making it emotional and leaving some out. One of my best friends said Monk heard all the notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them. And I love that, breaking it down. So what is the function of music?
I would say music, like every other art, can be functional or non-functional. It can
Yeah,
just be there for its own sake,
yeah,
right? And again, you know, the whole idea of having an art that you know, shows a purpose. Uh, I'm just not so sure that I necessarily want to do that, because purposes and functions change over the decades and
yeah.
centuries. And so, you know, yeah, I don't want to write anything with an expiration date in mind.
Oh,
Um,
that is so good. But I want to tell you, that's what, you know, Igor Stravinsky gave lectures. Music means nothing. So I love when I ask a lot of musicians this question, what's the function of music? And one of my favorite answers was there is no function of music. But I want to throw back at you a couple that I've made on my list and just have you respond to them. You
yeah,
know, John Cage said something similar to Bach. He said, it soothes the soul and makes it susceptible for divine intervention. So that's just like chilling out. Yeah, music can
right.
chill out. We know that.
Yeah,
Mickey Hart, the drummer for the Dead, you know, wrote a whole book on it and said it's a warning or it's a survival technique. You hit the log, they're coming to get your food, steal your food. So you hit the log and you make a beat, and that communicates something.
right.
My friend Dylan Buston says it's to dance. And one more I just want to air, and you can go off on whatever you want, is a great boogie woogie pianist, Norman Zamchek, said, to keep us from going insane.
There you go. Yeah,
So
there's something about.
any thoughts on those or any other? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is something about the human creation of art, I guess, that goes along with being self-aware.
Yeah.
Now, you know, to our knowledge, we don't know that there are animals necessarily that are creating art, unless you're talking about actually the way you know, the way a bird assembles twigs into a nest. Or I've heard that dolphins or whales can blow bubbles into shapes, and they you know, they think that they may be consciously aware of how this is.
Yeah.
I think the one big thing about humanity, and why I'm not necessarily worried about computer generated music or AI generated music in the future, is that it, it the human mind will go off on tangents that uh, you know, that it's part of the evolution of the human brain that makes it possible for us to go off on these tangents and to see relationships where other people don't find that, and then to make others aware of it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that we talk about when we're doing, you know, like if I'm at a symposium or something on, you know, having to do with logistics of space travel, or you know, how we are to advance enough as a civilization to become a multiplanetary species. And you know, the main reason for it is to actually advanced civilization right here on Earth. You know, like
Yeah.
all the things, this cell phone technology, computer, laptop technology that comes from our activities in space is directly related to that. But the other thing that you need in space is that it currently is not there right now. There's no, I do not believe there is any art aboard the space station. However, people do bring along their music that they want to listen to. And if you go into that the cupola on the space station where you can look out over the planet, well, that's amazing art right there. That is
Yeah.
living art, to be able
Yeah.
to look at the planet or off into, at the stars and the moon. Um, that's that must be an amazing experience. But yeah, we need to find a way to get the arts into space, and so, but the reason for that is just exactly as you alluded to keep people from going insane, to give them,
Exactly.
to give them purpose, to yeah, I mean, you talk about some of the things that happen when you're on a long space. There's deprivation of that kind. You don't have a lot of physical contact with other people, and I don't know. That part doesn't worry me so much because as a composer who mostly works from home, I spend a
Yeah.
lot of my days, there are times, yeah, there are always going to be times when I have to go out after the session, I have to go to a concert, I have to go to the store, pharmacy, whatever, and go out and meet friends for lunch or whatever. There's still that type of stuff, but being at home by myself working alone a lot has never been an issue for me. But I understand that there are people there that absolutely, my mother is that way. She needs a social interaction,
Yeah.
on a daily basis. and
Yeah.
uh and that's, so that's, again, that goes back to, what is it, what makes a human being. It's the sustenance, all the things that we derive uh pleasure, knowledge, satisfy our curiosity with, that give us the will to continue and to develop.
Yeah, because I just added yours to my list, number 12, self-awareness, because actually it resonates with David Moss. He said the function of music is the sound of being alive. So here's I'm curious. Aaron Copland says the four ingredients or elements of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. Now, I know there's more, but let's just talk about those four for a sec. In non academic terms, you're just explaining to a normal person what is tone color?
Yeah, tone color is exactly like you would think of, say, if you are looking at a sculpture or painting. It has to do with textures. And
Yeah.
so, non-academically, yeah, it's those combinations of all those different sonic colors
Yeah.
that helps you out. So, in other words, a distortion guitar has a much different tone color than an acoustic guitar, or a flute has a much different tone color than a tuba.
Yeah.
And so that's where tone colorings come in, and that's what makes for variety in sonic architecture. And that's one of the things that I deal with specifically by using a lot of instruments that have been invented over the years that are not so often used by a lot of other orchestral composers. Actually, Carl Stalling used a lot of these instruments because they had great comedic effect. These unusual
Exactly.
instruments, that people were not used to hearing, uh, could be used to great comedic effect in his writing. Now, of course, he was also, just plain a good writer and had a
Yeah.
great sense of humor and to figure out what sounds funny, because this is very different for different for different cultures. I have taken people from one culture to go listen to a music from another culture, and some of the comments I get sometimes are, I don't like the types of sounds I'm hearing. That sounds kind of corny, or that sounds, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Whatever. And it's because, well, it's because maybe, you know, a person that is used to French cuisine may not go
Right.
for you know, really spicy Pakistani food or something like that. You know, it's going to be a totally different experience for them. So,
Well,
uh,
Brett, you're anticipating this major question I asked, but it's coming
oh,
up. Maybe we'll get into it in part two, but this is, how do you know how to integrate melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color? All right, the question, I never got it refined. It's like, well, you're just intuitive or whatever, but is there a ritual of focusing into integrating the four? How do you know how to integrate melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color? Are you more one or the other, or what is your process of integrating those four major elements?
yeah, that's a great question, and I think the key is to listen and learn, because I
Yeah.
have studied again in great detail many musics from all around the world, and all stylistic periods. You know, going back to um, probably the 16th century, and so I'm aware of how others have put things together in the past, and that informs my decision for how I'm going to combine them in the future. I can often go again, you know, taking the timeless music of my father. I can go when I'm working on an idea. I can think about, well, this kind of reminds me of that song that my father did for, you know, such and such artist 30 years ago or whatever. And I'll get out his score and I'll read through it and I'll see what he did and how he solved problems. And so that will inform my decision. So how do we know this? Yeah, it's by learning, and some of it is copying examples of things that you like. When you copy it a little too closely, it becomes plagiaristic. If you don't copy it so closely and you add in a little bit of yourself, then it's more inspiration at that point. You've been inspired by this artist, but you're doing it. You're still doing things your own way. You're not overly mimicking how that other artist would have done things. So yeah, I think that's you know, knowing history is a great deal of it.
That is so articulate. You really taught me a lot there, Brett, because Harold Bloom in Anxiety of Influences says you absorb your influence, then you abandon them. So you're not being a wannabe. And to say, oh, I can go to my dad's scores and look at them, to me, that's another distinguishing factor I talk about is you're rooted, you're not retro. You're rooted in what your dad came up with and you study it as history and you learn from it, but you're not going to be, I'm going to be a Claire clone.
Right.
You're your unique person on your own.
Well, and I have plenty of music from other people too, and there are ideas, you know, that interest me that I think did not interest my father. So that's, you know, that's a way that I've differentiated myself. On the other hand, I feel that what he did was so unique for very complex reasons that, you know, would again take it's more, that's more of a thing that you do like a lecture at a, you know, at like a music symposium or something like that. But I felt that it was important enough to carry on these ideas that were kind of first conceptualized and coalesced under his thinking. Um, but you know, yes, of course, in my own way. And it again, I don't think of it having to do anything with a time period or a genre. I may be working on an R&B song, and there is something about a Mozart or a Chopin composition from the, you know, 18th or 19th century that I feel I need to study a little more before I continue writing on this R&B piece, because I think I can use those musical ideas. A good musical idea exists outside of genre. You know, a good idea is a good idea. and
Yeah.
then how we, how we fashion it, that becomes the genre. But I think, and and I would say that I don't necessarily, abandon what I have absorbed. I
Yeah.
just refashion it, right?
Yeah.
My father used to say
Refashion. Yeah.
everything comes from somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So there is, that's a whole philosophical thing, right? Is there an original idea after all these centuries of civilization? Is there an actual original idea? Because everything kind of comes from somewhere else, but it's how do you put it together in a new way
Yeah.
that makes it possible, actually, yes, for something to come along. Yeah, why did they not predict in Back to the Future that people would have cell phones? They
Yeah.
predicted electric cars, even the
Yeah.
sounds that the electric cars make in the year 2015, right? But they didn't predict cell phones,
Right.
So
But you almost described Spike Jones' great video of him saying how music was invented. It's two cavemen banging rocks together. And then it goes through Spike Jones running, like your sense of knowing the humor involved in music. And then it says, and then Spike Jones came along and returned it back to two cavemen banging two rocks together. So, Brett, this has really been enlightening for me. I really appreciate your time and energy and all your music. And I really hope we can plan a part two. It can be months down the line, and we can really get a lot deeper into music. So thank you so much. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Brett.
thank you.
See you.